going, and we'll take a short break and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our business building Q&A. I'm Mike O'Neill with Bench Builders, and I'll be your host again today for our Q&A session. Joining us today from right outside Savannah, Georgia, in Pooler, Georgia, is our expert panelist, Victoria Baylor. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you so much for having me.
And if you follow the coastline up from Savannah, you will be able to get to Hilton Head Island. Joining us this morning from Hilton Head is my colleague, Rhonda Beard. Welcome, Rhonda.
Good morning, Mike, and thanks for joining us, Victoria.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Later on in our segment, Rhonda's going to be sharing some information that will kind of be speaking to the whole notion of personal development. It's going to dovetail beautifully with what Victoria is going to be sharing with us this morning, but she'll also be kind of getting into mentoring and coaching and how all three of those will have changed as a result of our new post-COVID world. So just to remind those folks, we launched these Q&A sessions to help business owners, key leaders, and HR professionals stay on top of the important issues, the issues you need to stay on top of so that you can grow your business. Just to kind of remind you, this is a format by which we need to hear from you. We would like to know your questions. You've already found the chat box. List those questions in the chat box. And my job simply is to watch for those and to do the best of my ability to get those questions answered while we're together live today. Everybody who has registered will also be getting an email that contains a link to the recording and the slides that we're going to be using this morning. Today, we've invited Victoria to join us to deal with a topic that it's interesting because we've had marketing experts. We've had Mike Lieberman and Kevin on board as expert panelists talking about marketing your business and how important that is and how that's been impacted by COVID. But in reality, we need to be in position as individual leaders to be mindful of, we've got to be aware of our own personal brand, because your own personal brand is, according to Victoria, and I don't think anybody will argue, perhaps your greatest asset. And what you should be doing to strengthen and protect that personal asset, your personal brand, so that it doesn't go awry. So we've invited Victoria to join us. I think you're going to find Victoria a great person to get to know. Victoria, we're glad you are with us. I think I've given you access to the slides. I want to make sure you can do that. But
Okay.
as you're kind of doing just that, rather than me introduce you, would you mind sharing with the folks who are with us today a little bit who you are and how you help leaders with their personal brand and what your role as a mindset coach might be?
Okay, sure. Thank you so much again, both to you, Mike, Rhonda, and everyone in attendance that came out expecting to hear something really good today that's going to help encourage, uplift, and also just empower them more. So I'm happy to be a part of this today. A little bit about me. So right off the cusp, I am a mindset and brand brilliance coach. And I can kind of tell you what that means is pretty simple, is that I do help with people. I do help entrepreneurs mainly, and then of course some service-based leaders, both women and some men, with perfecting and really honing in on their personal brand. I do believe that your personal brand is your greatest asset. And I also believe I have my personal philosophy is that we all have a unique type of brilliance. So my job is helping people unpack that and then infuse that into their business strategy so that they can really leverage themselves in a greater way, position themselves greater so they can increase their impact and their income and the value that they offer other people. So from that standpoint, I have my own branding boutique called Baylor Brand Consulting. And then I'm also a TEDx speaker. So I love to speak on the topics of mindset and branding. I do take more of a personal development slant to that. So you'll kind of get a sense of that as we move along in this presentation. I like this overall homely feel that you guys have established, Mike and Rhonda. I think that's really, really great. And to follow suit with that, I'm going to pretend we are all, of course, related. So I want you to be very comfortable during this presentation. My job is not to hold numbers at you. Most of you know the numbers probably like the back of your hands anyway. I think in times of unrest or where there's different things going on, such as our current climate with COVID and other things, the ripple effects from it, I find that it's really good to oftentimes go back to the foundational understanding of things. I live in hurricane prone territory. So from that standpoint is that if we do get hit with something, usually if you have a house or something's been compromised, it's not just so much about the external. You want to make sure that that foundation is set because everything else is really based off of that. So that's what we're going to do today. And that is the slant we're going to take it, looking at your personal brand and then looking at ways in which you don't want to sabotage it. So oftentimes we forget how precious it is, and then ways in which we want to kind of protect it so that it can actually serve us well in our businesses and help us reach our business goals. So with that being said, I'm gonna try this control. I think let's see if it works. Give me 1 second. I think I've hit a button. Let me just make sure. If you could just guide me, Mike. I see a little small panel that pops up to move the slides forward.
Yeah, it will probably be on the bottom, and if not, I can go ahead and advance the slide to the first one.
Oh,
If you
I see
hover
it.
at the bottom, do you see it now?
Thank you. Yeah, it just kind of hit out there. So let me see if I can get it to pop back up. Okay, it's actually, no, it's not popping up for me.
Well, if you'll just kind of like do this, I'll advance it. So here we go.
I'll just say next, no problem. So we'll jump straight in. This is kind of a little bit of a refresher. It's always good because we hear the word brand being thrown around all the time. Brand is, I mean, it's kind of synonymous for several different meanings. But what I like to delineate is there's 2 types of branding. Of course, there's your visual branding, which is your business cards, your website, all that kind of stuff. It does with fonts, colors, things of that nature. But one point is for the personal branding side that it's actually obviously focused on you. So a lot of times people think personal branding, they think immediately website. They'll think that, okay, another part is that it's optional, which is not optional. Everyone actually has a personal brand. The question is, what is it for you? And then they tend to get to thinking it's, wrapped up in a product or service. So just to clarify, your personal brand really is, in essence, and simply stated, it's your professional image and your reputation. Now, we all know how important reputation is and how keen it is, but sometimes we don't realize exactly how we can create it. So what I love to do with personal branding is let people see that they're actually in the driver's seat of their personal brand, which means that if for some reason you don't like the reputation or image that you have or that others have of you, you are completely capable of changing it. It's probably one of the greatest tools in which it's not manipulation, but it's one of the greatest ways where you can provide value and help guide people in their understanding of you and who you are and what you can provide for them and what how you can interact and grow in your business or in your profession. So as I alluded to, it's about the impressions you make. And I want you to keep in mind that word impressions, because impressions are funny. There's kind of like a psychological, a mental component to it that I'll touch on later. But the greatest thing I think we all want to achieve in our personal brand is to have that market relevance. We want to be positioned as top of mind. So when someone comes to think about us or they need something that we have to offer, we're the first people that come up for them. So really your personal brand, if you develop it right, is actually your tool to help differentiate you and to help you stand out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, please. Well, before that, I want to mention the important point of knowing why it's so important to differentiate yourself. And I think this slide is kind of interesting. Usually it's an animated slide, but for the sake of the pause screen, you can't see the animation. But we all know that the world of social media has just kind of changed the dynamics of everything. I mean, we can get information to spread so fast, so quickly, and that everyone is actually inundated with tons of information as well. I thought this was an interesting figure, so I included it just to kind of help you wrap your mind around how much most people are actually bombarded every day with information. So it was, and I think this is an old figure now, but to the tune of 30,000 messages a day. So if you take out your time of sleeping, we're talking about waking hours, whether it's from a device, computer, TV, people are bombarded all day, every day. So if you think about it, your biggest goal in business is to stand out. How are you going to differentiate yourself and stand out in the midst of a crowded marketplace? There are thousands of people that do what you do. How will you do it differently? Next slide, please. Well, then that's where you come into play. Because as I mentioned before, there are thousands of people that do what you do. Oftentimes we have this misconception that we come to the table with a very unique idea, but often that's usually not the case. Most ideas are kind of some subset of something else. Nothing's truly an original, like we like to think. So the only thing that in the whole equation that's different, and the only thing that really is something that can't be duplicated, is you. And because we are, if you think about personal branding, it's really about self-marketing. How can you leverage the better parts of yourself so that you can draw that attention to your company, to that product, to that service? And here is kind of I think it's an easier way to think of it. I like to think everybody has their own brand brilliance equation. So there's the parts of your brand that are very unique to you. And if you can extrapolate those and formulate a strategy around those, you can actually formulate yourself in such a way that people really do get a new approach to you as a person and what you represent. And then you get really clear on the value you bring, and then you can showcase that in a lot of different formats. So for instance, on the left, if you look at unique factors that you have that are just unique to you, maybe it's your values, your beliefs, your experiences, the story of how you got into the work you got into, or how you started the business you started. Very important to have that information. And from all that, you're able to, if you're wise, you can take that information and develop a strong brand identity. So that's where your unique value proposition is born, or your personal brand message. And then when you have that packaged message, the question now is, how do you get that out to the world? How do people see that? So you want to use your communication tools to actually put that on display. And there's a lot of tools that we have that oftentimes we kind of undermine or maybe not think about, but they really go a long way to either communicate our message or detract from it. So the question we always have is what I'm doing really communicating it, or is it taking away? Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a quick, in a nutshell, jump into what you could potentially look like. And I know this is kind of a funner way of looking at it. So, because I think sometimes we take ourselves and we take our businesses and we take what we have to do so seriously that we forget that people interactions are really important, and that it's not so much the staunchy or the really strict formulaic way in which we kind of put ourselves out there. You know, I'm responsible, I'm timely, I'm this, I'm that. It's really all the other pieces to us that give us room to connect with people. If you think about branding, there's 3 levels of communication, or there's 3 levels in which you can connect with people. One is rational. So we're thinking about what's your level of education, your experiences, things like that. The next is emotional. So hence some of those pieces we ignore of ourselves, like your personality. How do you make people feel when they interact with you? And then the third is like your sensory driven mechanisms, such as the way you look, maybe the way you're speaking. So how that affects people's senses. So really personal branding isn't one dimensional at all. So it's really important to be able to explore in some of these other pieces, such as if you had to think of it as you have a certain secret sauce, what would be the point of that sauce? And Mike, did you have any questions? I didn't want to keep going in case something popped up.
Thank you. I will interrupt you, hopefully not mid-sentence, but when we do get those. You're doing great. Keep going, please.
Okay, great. So everyone has their own secret sauce, which I think is really amazing to think of it that way. And the reason I use that analogy is key. If you think about like the McDonald's Big Mac, which has been around, not a fan of the sandwich, but it's been around for about 50 plus years. Burgers are just burgers, believe it or not. I mean, there's hundreds, thousands of burger joints, but oftentimes what separates them is what's put on that burger. So your secret sauce is kind of the same way. And I like to always think back to my kid who is like obsessed with Chick-fil-A sauces. But if you think about a secret sauce that you love, you want to put it on everything. You want to share it with everybody. You have to start thinking of your personal brand as being more than, again, just this representation of a product or service. It's really about the inner workings of you as a person and all these elements, and really defining those key pieces enough to the point where people will get a sense of what you represent, and they'll want to authentically connect with you, as it says at the bottom, and you're able to attract people to have the same values you have. And then oftentimes in just looking at how you're wired, you can uncover your purpose and then build that know, like, trust factor. Next slide, please. So that, with that being said, I went a little bit lengthy in that part, just to make a point is that one big thing sometimes I think we often avoid is that we forget that brands are humanized. We forget that there's that humanized, or there's that side of connection that's all about that human touch. So, and we can kind of see it in that whole idea of people adhere to you, or they're going to connect with you based on if they know, like, or trust you. So I thought these were some kind of interesting statistics that most of you already know, perhaps already, but it just underscores that point that it really is about more than just you having a product or service or working with a company. It's really about leveraging more of yourself so that you can actually make deeper connections that will be very beneficial to your business. So I think in branding, of course, we all know it takes between 5 to 7 impressions to create brand awareness. 89% of shoppers stay loyal to people and brands that share their values. That applies to people as well. Even people's impressions of you, sometimes they have to circulate around you for a few times, have a few interactions, and then they get this imprint in their mind about what you represent. If they like it and it connects with them, there's some major loyalty that can happen. And then the trust factor. We know the importance of relationships. So oftentimes, even having strong relationships, especially in business, can really push your business forward. But when people don't really know what you represent on a deeper level, and they really don't have an idea of your strong image or the impressions you're making, it creates, I would say, confusion that won't kind of spearhead these kind of connections. Next slide, please. So I decided to put this here just kind of for anyone that had a little bit of curiosity behind the whole idea of impressions. When I mentioned to you the power of impressions, I really wasn't joking. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I'm also a mindset coach. So as I mentioned before, I'm a brand brilliance mindset coach. I love to put the two together to help people remove the mental blocks that might be getting in the way of them seeing themselves, and then help leverage better, of course, the assets they have in their business. But one of the biggest blocks I find is that we don't really realize the way people process information. And that information also being ourselves. So we've heard that whole adage that it takes about 3 seconds to make an impression. And when people hear that, they're like, is that really possible? And then they do like the countdown and they look at a picture and they think about all the things that they see a picture of someone, what pops into their mind. But I really want to underscore this part here to make a strong point that impressions happen super fast. So it kind of really does encourage you to be on your P's and Q's about everything that you put out about yourself, everything that you share, and everything that you promote, because it's going to help that information or those pieces builds and is compiled upon to build a complete database of information that someone has on you that oftentimes it takes just 3 seconds to put together, and they might not even know why. Have you ever been in a situation where you had an impression of someone and you couldn't even describe what it was that made you feel a certain way? Maybe it was positive or it was negative. It's because of how the brain works. So our conscious mind, which is what we currently consciously think of, we're here, we're having this presentation, we're sitting, we're paying attention. That's all a conscious process. So it kind of underscores that it works at 2,000 bips. So I think that's bits of information per second. What I want to make note of, your conscious mind is only 5% of your thinking. 95% of your thinking actually is subconscious. which means you store a lot of information you're not always aware of. If you look at the difference of the processing, that's 400 billion bips. It says those impulses travel at a speed of up to 100,000 miles per hour. So if you think that one post on Facebook, it's not going to really mean anything in the long grand scheme of things, think again. Because as I like to think of impressions that we make, I like to think of Monet's paintings. His paintings are comprised of thousands of brush strokes. Those brush strokes help give you a complete picture. So does everything that you put out there. So it's so important to be, if we're talking about strengthening your personal brand, awareness is really where it starts. And then just really taking time to get clear on all the components of you and making sure they're building that image that you want to project. Next slide, please.
Before we go to the next slide, may I ask?
Sure.
It's not unusual. You would hear parents say, first impressions matter. And what I'm hearing you say by this, I didn't know what a bip was until this morning. But what you're saying is 95% of the brain is operating at extremely fast level. And if you go back to a previous slide, you made the distinction between knowing, liking, and trusting. Mm-hmm. Is it your opinion that some folks in a matter of seconds can almost feel like they know, like, and trust someone?
That's an exceptional question, and yes. Oh my goodness. And a lot of that is, I would say, is due to the fact of, if the person who is encountering someone else, if they are intentionally using and exuding those natural abilities or their gifts and their strengths in such a way to make it more obvious to people, it's almost like having forgive the analogy. I always tell my clients, I said, if you think about brand impression, you have 2 glasses of water, little small glasses. One has vodka in it, one has water. If your brand had to be one of them to get a reaction, which one do you want it to be? So when you concentrate yourself in such a capacity, it's almost like that vodka reaction. People take it in, and it's like, whoa. Water itself is pretty neutral. So they might get a sense of, okay, this is good for me, this is nice. But from a personal branding standpoint, you want to impress hard and in such a way that it really does make it very clear about who you are, what you represent, and what you bring to the table. Because I don't know, I'm sure you feel the same way. When I've experienced people like that, those are the people that get me to circle back around and say, let me go further. Let me go and pursue this person. And those are the people you really readily want to connect with.
Could I follow that up with a question from Christina? Christina
Sure.
advises us at Bench Builders, and so I can see why she would ask this question, but she asks, do people absorb maybe images of people faster through the subconscious than maybe they'd even do logos?
Oh, that's a very good question. I have to think about that one. I know from the image standpoint that they said, I think about the statistics is that people process it. They have to break it down from 100%, 55% of what people process is based on what they see. However, I challenge that. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that, please let me know. What's interesting about logos, so if you look at corporations and companies, and I'm actually going to underscore this later, if you look at how they use color and how they use design, I think there's a statistic that people will easily recognize them. It's like 89% ability to recognize the next time go around, like it imprints fast. So I think respectively, they both are very strong. I don't know specifically which would outcompete the other one. But I think that in regards, I think they might be processed even differently because people are processed, person to person. And then that logo is actually attached to something else. That's actually a really good question. I don't have an exact answer, but I can definitely say that both are very important.
It is an excellent question. And I mentioned Christina, she kind of advises us because she's trying to help us create more awareness about our own organization, Bench Builders. And one of the things she stressed, she said, if you're all going to do these webinars, you need to turn the camera on. So for the first 3 of them, we didn't, but going forward, we did. And what she was saying, and I think you're reinforcing that, is that people get to know you and over time, we hope, they will begin to assume you know what you're talking about, but this is what's key. They begin to trust you because they can see you and they can see all of those cues that you were making reference to. So Christina, it looks like you were right all along. I will go to the next slide then.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's a key point, because from a logo standpoint, there's not, it leads you to something else that if there's not that same warmth that you get from a person. So I think that direct to direct, absolutely so important. What I like to do though, I think I'm a little bit of a tender heart, is that I don't like to blame people for things they don't know. Because oftentimes when we talk about, now we're getting to the part of talking about blind spots. Oftentimes, people don't know how to protect their personal brand because they don't realize that it's vulnerable. And they don't know how it may be vulnerable. So I love using this psychological principle, even when I'm coaching with my clients, that it's called the Johari window. And it's, long story short, what it really does underscore is that there's 4 parts to you as a person, as far as like the way people can know you. So there's a part of you that's open, where people know you, you know yourself. Part 2 is where you're blind. So that's a part where you might not know as well as other people may see something that you may be missing. That's how you have someone in the office that has like a really bad attitude, but may be like the last person to know it when they're confronted with it. The third part is the part of you that's hidden. So you know it, but you don't share it with everybody else. And then the fourth part is that part of you that's unknown to you and to others. The reason, again, I like to underscore this is part 2 is where usually those blind spots pop up, because there's a part sometimes in which, if you think about branding, it's really about feedbacks that you get from other people. It's not so much about what you assume about yourself or your even impression. It's really about what Jeff Bezos says. Branding is about what people say when you leave the room. So with that being said, it'd be really imperative to start thinking about, okay, what am I really putting out there? I know what my intention is, but am I really being able to actually facilitate that? So this is a place where you really want to get feedback. And then you want to exercise mindfulness, which is what I underscore when I talk about your subconscious thinking. You want to actually be more consciously aware of, how am I dressing? How am I speaking? How am I presenting myself to other people? And then get feedback. If you keep that loop and cycle going, you will definitely sharpen your brand.
So could I follow up that? Because
Sure.
you stress the importance of self-awareness, and that lack of self-awareness can oftentimes be a blind spot. Rhonda is asking a really interesting question, and that is, we stress how important it is to make a good first impression, but let's just say you made a bad first impression. How long does it take to change that? Or how many interactions does it take before people begin to change that first impression?
You know, it just depends on, that's very subjective, but I think from my personal opinion, sometimes it can turn around even in the next interaction. I think it depends on, first of all, to how many people that went out to. Sometimes it's one-on-one, you can have a conversation. This is where emotional intelligence comes in. Sometimes a simple conversation and saying, hey, I apologize, I was off my game today. You kind of caught me at a tough spot. You know, doesn't really represent me. That can help kind of turn people around. And then going forward with that consistency, because believe it or not, people do judge you based off of, we talk about know, like, trust. Trust happens with consistency. If I go to McDonald's, I don't know why I'm using fast food because I don't eat a lot of it, but if I go to McDonald's and their fries doesn't taste like what it tastes like 20 years ago, then it messes up with the trust part, because they are producing a product that should always yield the same results. We shouldn't, in a way, be the same way. So if you do create kind of an issue like that, it's just a matter of going to it, confronting it, putting out the fire as fast as possible, and then doing a reverse course, and definitely maybe going into a pump a little bit, maybe go a little bit further and pumping out some actions that will help hamper the negativity that was out there about you. I hope that answers the question.
I believe it does, and I'm going to get chastised for bringing this up, but I did watch a documentary not long ago about McDonald's French fries. And
Oh, did
the
it?
reality
Did
is
it
they taste different because they're cooking them different.
Oh, well, you're absolutely right. I thought about it after I said it. You're absolutely right, because well, what's interesting to even talk about that, but anyway, I know like in Europe and other countries, they have whole different recipes based upon what they can slide into it. But the idea of having something that, well, we'll say the Big Mac is pretty much the same, but having that one thing that people can kind of trust and rely on is very, very important. Yeah, recipes can change a little bit, but that actually brings up a really good point. your brand actually evolves too. But we're talking about the underlining message behind it. The golden arches light will always be on. It'll always be synonymous with being a brand that's always about excitement, fun, by that, vivacious living. So from that standpoint, it doesn't. But that actually brings up a good point.
So here we know, you mentioned that the recipe might be different in Europe. We have with us today Hedden, who is actually joining us from Iceland. So maybe he's enjoying a different McDonald's French fry than we are, and you just proved it. Okay.
Awesome. So now we're going to get into the final 3 slides. We're going to look at 3 different blind spots that can kind of hold you back. So I've alluded to some of these. Just going to dig a little bit deeper just to kind of transplant that idea. As I always like to say, it's not so much about preaching numbers to people or trying to, whip them over the head. It's really about strengthening your conviction about something, because data sometimes always doesn't change a person. It's really their convictions. So I really want you to definitely be looking out for this particular area, which I think is the first and foremost area where people struggle to really showcase all that they represent. This can be a huge blind spot for them. And that is, simply put, not knowing your value. So I like to use this example of this Monet painting called Haystacks. And in 1986, it was $2.5 million. If you look at 14 years later, it's worth $110 million. And in essence, and this is what I definitely underscore with my clients, I think all of our value should be increasing, like continuously, as you're developing yourself, getting deeper in your strengths, learning more about yourself, leveraging your connections. Overall, your value should be increasing. But sometimes if you're not watching this part, or if you're not spending a lot of time developing your value or really paying attention to the value that you bring, again, it's so easy to have a career where you're so immersed on that product, that service, that job, the position, the role, the title, that you lose your identity. And that, in essence, was my TEDx talk, was centered around that, how you can lose your identity. So what I want to encourage today is that, remember, your value, what you have to offer, does help you understand what your identity is, which will give you relevance. We're talking about marketplace relevance. And really, if you're thinking in simplest terms, what are you really talented at? What are you good at? How can you develop that more? And anytime you're really good at something, on the opposite end, someone else is not. So then that means that you can become a problem solver for someone else. And that gives you relevance, that gives you opportunity to create some changes and business opportunities and things of that nature. So it's important to know yourself first, to know what message you come to the table with, what do you provide, what problem you solve, and then who are you invaluable to. So blind spot number 1 is definitely getting clear on your value. I mean, watching out for that. Next slide, please. Ways to get clear on your value, very simple. Most people have done some part of these. I say always, there's lots of ways to do it, but personality assessments are some of the great ways. It serves as a really good springboard. And, we're kind of used to DISC and Myers-Briggs, but there's also other assessments that are really great. One that I love to kind of underscore is Fascinate. I use it with my clients. It really teaches you how people see you from the outside looking in. So it gives you a unique advantage. You're talking about personal branding and gauging your impressions. It actually helps you see that component and that side of yourself on what really fascinates people about you based on your personality type. So lots of great tools there. And then not just looking at it itself. This is where it's key. So I'll have clients read through their stuff. And then my job is, because I'm an expert coach and a laser coach, you really want to get with someone that can process it. Because remember, creating your personal brand is about connecting dots. So oftentimes it's like a puzzle. You can have the pieces on the table, but if they're disconnected, you still can't see the picture, but you can have all the pieces. So who can you connect with that'll help bring those pieces together and give a great picture of your personal brand? Next slide, please.
Victoria, as you know, one of the advantages of us hosting these is we come in contact with experts like you. We are at Bench Builders very familiar with Myers-Briggs and DISC, and I'm familiar with Enneagram, but I was not familiar with Fascinate. So I've just made a note to look into Fascinate. So thank you for the tip.
You're welcome. Next blind spot, and this this may seem obvious, but oftentimes it's not when you're trying to watch 8 things at one time. I think sometimes we forget that communication is, there's several different ways to communicate. So oftentimes you have to kind of think to yourself is, do you find yourself only focusing on 1 or 2 areas? You know, I want to make sure I'm dressed well. I want to make sure I'm articulating properly. But then there's the communication you make and using your digital footprint, your emails and social media. And then what about your emotional intelligence? That's a huge part of interacting with people, your introspection and introspection. How well do you process your own thoughts? And then so you can help process through and understand other people. So everything we do is really communication. It's about knowing who you are and knowing that value, but then also being able to actually translate that in a way that actually other people can understand. So these are just 8 different types. It's really, really important. And I mentioned this because oftentimes it can kind of get overlooked. And if you think about a wheel as like a tire, if all of these 8 pieces aren't equally inflated, how do you think that car's going to drive? If it's on a, you know, this wheel and this tire's on the car, it's not going to drive very well. And neither will your brain. So your job is really to make sure that you're inflating and make sure you're really good in all these areas and you're communicating properly. That will be the difference between spreading your message quicker or actually confusing people. Next slide, please. And then just as a communication tool, I think we already underscored the power of color just briefly, but that's an important component. A lot of companies use it. That's why I like to use this kind of slide. And it's important for you as a person to actually also use it. If you have any questions about this, I'd be happy to talk about it off screen because I know we're on a little bit on the time schedule, but it's very important to look at color and then to realize you can utilize color because subconsciously it creates messages as well. So think about what you're wearing, how you want to wear it. I have a thermometer there because color temperature is important. So the wrong colors will actually detract away from your face, your skin, your hair, make you look tired and sick. The right colors actually will add to it and then make people want to engage more. And then final slide, please. Blind spot number 3. You've probably heard this a lot of times, but you can't underscore this one enough. How you speak can be a major blind spot. And I'm really specifically talking about the sound of your voice. So I don't know if you've ever, if you're in a place, I work with a lot of clients, some are a little bit nervous about the way they talk, they enunciate, their diction. It's worth noting and paying attention to how people respond to the sound of your voice. And it's also even more important to know how you use your voice. A cute little exercise is that statement up top where it says, I did not eat your piece of cake. If you think about it, if you say that and put emphasis on each of those words differently, it will change the entire tone of the sentence. So if I say, I did not eat your piece of cake, that kind of sends off some vibes of, oh, there's a little bit of aggression there. And if I change my voice to, I did not eat your piece of cake, that kind of just even changing my tone, varying my pitch, sound, height, all of that's super important. I think there's I think it's a university in Chicago that did a study on tones, and they found that the ear is able to pick up about 1,300 different types. So if that doesn't create an awareness for you to think about how am I coming off, it's really important. And the last thing I think to really notate about that is that it's not so much as the old saying goes, not what you say, it's how you say it. But it's really being clear on how people are perceiving what you're saying and asking them. Because if you have the type of voice, believe it or not, you can be saying something powerful, but if it doesn't transmit well, you're gonna lose people. They're gonna get bored. If you don't know how to use inflection, heighten your voice, lower it. So here are some last quick tips. It says, of course, the sound of your voice can either repel or attract. So if you're struggling with the way you're kind of coming off, you want to definitely practice in the mirror. You want to vary your inflection and tone. If you feel like you're like too monotone, you can actually do one of the exercises listening to, saying nursery rhymes in a very funny voice, just to kind of practice with that fluctuation. Too low of a voice kind of may sound like you're angry, and then too high of a voice can make it actually sound like you're inexperienced and you're not really sure of yourself. So just be important or be mindful of that. And then lastly, mirroring is always a safe bet. Mirroring is just great in general when dealing with people. If someone's talking to you at a certain pace, catch up to them. Now, don't do it in a way that's obstructive or that makes it seem like you're maybe poking fun of them if they're either too high or too low, but try to keep a tone and a way of speaking that mirrors them, because it automatically makes people feel comfortable. So that is the blind spot number 3, which is pay attention to how you speak. And that actually concludes my part. If anybody have any additional questions.
Oh, I have one, and then we're going to move to Rhonda here in just a moment. But Benjamin makes an interesting point, and he writes, mirroring seems to be a challenge on Zoom meetings.
Ooh.
Um,
Was that just that? Was there anything else to that? I don't want to.
That was more, I think, more of a statement, but maybe we could turn that into a question. Might there be some things you have to suggest to Benjamin and others on what we could do when we're constrained by what these type of Zoom formats?
I mean, Benjamin, you're so right. First of all, half of us are looking in a box about size of this big, especially you're trying to look at everybody at one time. I would make the recommendation of, if you can kind of expand your screen, sometimes it'll help you see people better. Really, you just want to think of, if there's lots of people talking, you want to think of the overall tone of the event. What is it feeling? So people are overall excited. You don't want to come in and be like, well, I think. So from that standpoint, don't think of it so much on an individual basis. Think of it on a collective basis, and just kind of go with the flow. I think that kind of helps in a regard. And then really just be true, of course, to how you present yourself and bringing your best tools there. I think it'll help fill in any gaps if there's anything missing in the communication style. I hope that helps.
Christina writes, this is interesting. One mirroring tactic, she writes on Zoom, is that let's say they have their video off and yours on, turn off your own. And that way you would have less of a one-sided conversation. That's a good idea. I was speaking to a client last week, and they introduced me to something that I had not picked up on. And they're saying that they have begun using that exact same technique in interviews of candidates, because most of everything we do now is virtual, is that they will purposely turn off the camera and they're listening. And they're finding that they're hearing things that they might not be, quote, hearing when you don't have the visual that could be counteracting that. So it kind of reinforces the point you're making, and that is from a messaging standpoint. I know Hedden has a question, but what I'd like to do, if you're okay with this, Victoria, Rhonda's going to share a few things on her end. And then what I'd like to do, time permitting, is to see if we can maybe ask some questions of you on the tail end of this, some questions that will be coming up here. So can you stick with us for a few more minutes?
Oh, absolutely.
Perfect. Rhonda, I'm going to transition to you. I hope we still have you. They don't have you on camera. Rhonda, we've got you here. Can you see the screen, and are you there?
I can, and I'm here.
Perfect. We thought that the kind of things that Victoria's going to be talking about, it dovetails so beautifully with the kind of work we do with clients. Can you pick up where Victoria left off and see to what extent that might be a good marriage there?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. And thanks, Victoria. Great tips. And I think some of what I'd like to share expands on that just a little bit more in terms of professional development. So if you can go to the next slide, Mike, one of the things that I think a lot of us have experienced are these side effects from COVID. So we've lost some communication with people. We've lost definitely a lot of in-person communication. But again, through Zoom and video and phone, some of the communication is just not the same. And we have some people who are not at work at all, or maybe not working because of family obligations. So the whole dynamic of communication within the workplace has definitely changed. And for those that are still working, whether it's remote or at home, there's distractions too. We all know, I'm not going to even get into the school schedule changing topic because we could spend days on that, but that's a huge distraction for anybody who has children, or even for people who have employees who have children. And then just the changes businesses have had to make in order to survive. So many businesses have had to change their whole business model have had to change the way they offer products, the way they do business, maybe even bring in new products, new sales approaches. So there's been so many distractions with changes that have happened. Staffing challenges in some companies, they're laying off, they're closing. Others, there are some businesses that are obviously thriving in the new environment and they're having problems hiring people. So these are just some of the distractions that businesses and people have had that have, in many cases, put professional development on the back burner. But for you to be successful, you have to make sure that professional development stays on the front burner and stays as a priority for you personally as well as for your people. So if you can go to the next slide, Mike. So just a few ideas and areas that you really should be focusing on is building and developing your skills for what we're dealing with right now. So the skills that many people need now are different than you needed a year ago. And even just the technology piece of it, the skills that people need to be able to conduct webinars like this, to do video conferencing with customers, to make that great impression online versus in person. So that's really hard to do. So providing that development for people so they can be just as successful virtually maybe as they have been in person. So don't lose sight of your needs. And I think that the assessments are a great tool as well, Victoria. We really appreciate you bringing that up. If you haven't been through something like that, that's a great foundation to start with, to really take a look at your strengths, your weaknesses, how people perceive you, how you're coming across to others. I've done a number of them, and it's always eye-opening. Even though you think you know yourself and you think you know what you need to do, it always brings up something new. And it's a great opportunity to focus on professional development in those areas that that assessment will bring out. So those are great tools. But even coaching, you know, everybody needs coaching from time to time. And coaching might look very different right now, and it might be in very different areas. So you typically think of coaching at an executive level or management level and coaching people on their leadership skills, and that's absolutely a necessity. But some of the needs that people might have now are coaching on decision making. Decisions that people are making now are very different, maybe more difficult, maybe making decisions a lot quicker with limited information. And so people might need coaching and training on how to do that, or to be told and know that it's okay to make decisions even if you don't have all the information. We had a webinar on this a few weeks ago, how to make decisions in the environment you're in now, manage crisis. People really need coaching and support just in their own emotional and mental health. So with all the distractions that people have, a lot of us, a lot of our managers, people that work for us, they may be emotionally really suffering and we don't know it. So offering some ways just to give them an outlet, just to allow them to vent, to share concerns, and in some ways provide some psychological support. And the more that we can help our people, the more that they'll be able to help their people. So even coaching in how to help support your employees, how to identify your employees' emotional and mental health needs. And anything we do for ourselves is going to help us be better people to our people. And anything we do for our employees is going to help them be better people to anyone around them, whether it's home, family, employees. So making sure that you're getting the coaching you might need, as well as providing the coaching for people in what they're dealing with right now. And again, a lot of that is psychological, mental, emotional, and just really how to handle the stresses that are hitting so many people in so many different ways. And then Victoria mentioned briefly a mentor. Find a mentor. Have a mentor that you can trust, because mentors can definitely help you in your professional development, can help you even if you have, you know, the assessments we talked about, can help you point out areas and how you can develop your skill sets, how you can improve your image. So all of these types of development will definitely brand you better and help you with your image, but you have to be able to know, again, what those blind spots are. You have to be able to identify where your development needs are and figure out how to get help in those, and then help your people with that as well. And again, it's very difficult today to get that development. I shouldn't say very difficult, different to get it virtually. But there's so many opportunities out there right now. I mean, if you're like me, I get multiple emails a day on different webinars, different training, different things that are going on. So take advantage of that, because many of them you can do anytime. It doesn't have to be during business hours. You can do them after hours. So take the time to find out where there are professional development opportunities that you can use online, and you can do at your own time. And then really make sure that you're utilizing that information and developing some goals and plans out of what you're getting. I see somebody's asking, how do you pick a good mentor? In my view, a mentor, Victoria, not Valerie, Victoria, you might have something to add to this too. But a mentor has to be, first of all, someone who knows more than you know, that can offer you more knowledge than what you have, and someone you trust, someone that will be honest with you, that you can be honest with, will give you feedback and help you grow. Someone you can go to and say, hey, I'm having this problem. I don't know how to deal with it. And someone you feel very comfortable being able to share things with. So mentor needs to be someone you know, someone that you've had some time with and understand their background, they understand yours, and they can help you grow and develop in your knowledge and skill set. And Victoria, would you have anything else to add to that with a mentor, picking out a mentor?
No, I think I think you said it quite well. It really is about having that rapport with someone, and then having someone that's already kind of really settled, successful in a certain area. It doesn't even have to necessarily be your area, and you can have multiple mentors. I always think it is good to have someone that's already kind of in your specific area, because they can kind of, help lead and guide you through that current climate. But anyone that's already pretty much established that you can glean from. But I always tell people, you want to make sure those relationships are actually mutualistic. For every mentor I had, I was someone that I approached, and I definitely approached with much thought and a kind of a plan of action, and then a way in which I could help them. Not all mentorships have to be one-sided. So it really does help deepen that relationship and that friendship, because you're able to give them something that they don't have, which shows your value as well. And then you're able to get from them also.
Excellent. I'll start with you, Victoria. Does a mentor have to be someone older than you?
Oh, not necessarily. I don't think so. I think it's I always say, listen here, if I had a 5-year-old that was wiser than me that could lead and guide, no, just kind of a little bit of a joke, but not necessarily. I think it's about experience, and then also about I think what Rhonda said and what I underscored earlier is about finding someone that has something that you're missing, or they can either help you in that area where you need to, that's kind of a blind spot for you. So age really isn't a factor. I think it's about looking and really studying and looking at what their traits are, what they're capable of. I wouldn't haphazardly pick a mentor just because they look like they're doing stuff and it feels, because it's a relationship. So there has to be that connection and that synchronicity between it. But no, age I wouldn't factor in at all.
Rhonda, your thoughts?
No, I agree. Experience and knowledge, I think, are the factors that are going to be most beneficial in a mentor, someone that, and I like, Victoria, what you're saying too, a mutual relationship where you both can benefit. And many times a mentor may not realize how much they can teach or help someone until they're asked. And, but the experience and knowledge and just honesty and advice that someone can offer you, I think are going to be the greatest attributes in a mentor as you're looking for one.
I can't believe yet again we're about out of time. I'd like to advance to our last slide and just make sure we've got this right. Victoria, you shared with us that you've been a TEDx speaker. If we want to see your TEDx talk, how do we access it?
Well, you can go to my website, victoriabaylor.com, and there's a link there under, I think, speaking. So you can find it there. And then you can also go to YouTube and just look up Victoria Baylor TEDx, and then I'll pop up as well. But those two places, I'm out there.
Excellent. So this will be in the material that you will get. This has Victoria's contact information, and you also can see if she was invited to be a TEDx speaker, how fortunate we are to have her as a guest panelist this morning. Victoria, thank you very much.
Oh, look, I feel equally honored. Thank you guys. enjoyed kind of gleaning from you as well, and just the platform you're building. Thank you for having me.
This has turned into an experience that I've enjoyed greatly, getting to know folks like Victoria in a much deeper level than I would otherwise. I want to go back to this previous slide, and we're going to close with this, and that is, when COVID hit hard 6 months ago, we began these live Q&A sessions to address the important questions that you were raising. And we were very flattered. We were very flattered because literally hundreds of business owners, key leaders, and HR professionals, just like you, have registered for a webinar. And we've got a number who have actually attended all 23 of our webinars, and we're very, very grateful. But in listening to clients and listening to the folks who have been doing this, they've kind of asked, would we even consider changing our format? And that is maybe change to a podcast, perhaps a 30-minute podcast with the same high quality guests like Victoria, but in a format that enables you to listen at your convenience. And we concluded that's a great idea. So we're going to be converting this 60-minute live webinar to a 30-minute podcast. We're calling this podcast Get Unstuck and On Target. And Thursdays, as you know, has become kind of a tradition for this. And so we're going to launch this new podcast on Thursday, September 17th. And we've already lined up some great guest experts. So you'll be getting an email shortly that will invite you to subscribe to this podcast. You can do so using your favorite platform, be it iTunes, Spotify, whatever you prefer to use. But what we're going to ask is we hope that you will subscribe. And not only will you subscribe, but we invite you to invite your friends. If you have benefited from some of the guest folks that we've had here, everything we've done thus far is still on our website. You can go to our website and listen to any of these 23 webinars. But going forward, in addition, you will have access to these 30-minute podcasts. So let me encourage you to give consideration to subscribing. And if for those folks who are visual, which is kind of like me, we're going to keep this same format, whereas we're going to upload the video portion of a podcast, and it will be found on our website, and we're uploading it to YouTube. So we hope that will make sense. So it's feedback from you, the folks who have participated, that have given us a sense of what works best for you. We hope over the last 6 months or so that you have found value in these Q&A sessions. Going forward, we want to keep that same format in place. You still have a chance to ask your questions, and we'll be giving you access to our experts so they can answer your questions directly. So we hope that the time you spent with us this morning, you will conclude has been productive. We are, again, very, very appreciative of how many of you have signed up week in and week out to do this. And we hope that you'll continue to be part of what we're doing and will subscribe to this upcoming podcast. So Victoria, thank you.
Thank you. Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Well, you are a delight, and I've not watched your TEDx talks. I'm looking forward to doing that. And Rhonda, again, I've enjoyed spending these last 6 months with you on these webinars, but thank you for doing yet another great job today.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for joining us, Victoria. Really enjoyed hearing your tips today.
So
Absolutely.
on behalf of Bench Builders, I want to say thank you. Go out there, be mindful of your brand. It is your greatest asset. And we wish you all the best and hope that we will be hearing from you soon. All the best, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.